Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today.
Good evening and welcome back to Coast AM. Tonight, the Andreasson affair, the true story of a close encounter of the fourth kind. Joining us this evening are Betty Andreasson Luca and her husband Bob Luca. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
What an amazing account and case. Betty, let me ask you this. Prior to your experience, had you had anything in your life that you would consider to be supernatural, paranormal in nature, or what was your belief system in aliens and the possibilities of UFOs?
Well, I didn't even know really about them. I was more interested in the Word of God. You know, that was my life more or less. But I did have 3 childhood encounters before the 1967 encounter. And one was at 7 years old, the second one is at 12 years old, and then 13 years old. And the 13-year-old one, I was taken aboard the craft and brought before the one once again. But
all right, well, let's reel it back. I mean, you had 3 encounters as a youngster. Talk to me, what is your memory of the very first encounter, and what happened? Well,
the very first encounter, I was only 7 years old, and I was living in Leominster, Massachusetts. I was out in a little hut that my brother had made in the front yard, and I was waiting for my friend Dee Dee to come over and play dolls with me. So I was sitting there, and I was eating some crackers when all of a sudden a bee came in the hut, and it buzzed around me. However, it didn't look like a bee. It sounded like a bumblebee, but the thing is, it came and hit me right on the forehead and in between the eyes and bit me. And at that point, I went down and went out. And I heard a voice saying, "The wee little one is coming along fine." So evidently, they've been checking me for quite some time. And they also said for me to expect something in the future to be happening. And that was at 7 years old. And
let me ask you this, Betty, if I could. Let me ask you this. I mean, do you have an allergic reaction to bee stings?
I don't have it. No, it doesn't bother me. I was sort of a tomboy. I was always out in the woods. I was fishing. I was catching bees, for that matter, and snakes and all that.
Sure. Well, I ask because I know the learned community of Coast to Coast AM listeners are going to question if you saw something you thought was a bee, it hit you between the eyes, stung or bit you, and then you went down. Could it have been some type of allergic reaction and a hallucinatory reaction that you were having? Now, when you said you heard this message, was it telekinetic? Was it something that you just kind of heard inside your head, or could you hear external voices speaking about you?
I heard it inside my head, that the wee little one is coming along fine. That is what I heard. And after, when I did go down, Dee Dee came over, and I got up. I was crying and said a bee had bit me, because they let you know in certain ways how to forget what has happened. And she looked at my forehead, and she said, "Well, there's no bump and there's no bite there. You know, you're all right." So I just let it go. The second time was at 12 years old. As I told you, I was sort of a tomboy, so I was out in the woods all the time, into everything, catching frogs, going fishing, all that sort of things that kids love to do. And we had moved from Leominster to Westminster, Massachusetts, and it's sort of in the country, so I was just overjoyed. So there's where they had said that I would be very happy very shortly, and this was at 12 years old. And it was an older farm, and I went into one of the sheds, and I saw some traps in there. And I thought, wow, I think I'll see if I can catch something, because I was always in the woods, and I had noticed a big hole up by the mountain laurel, and I thought, I think I'll see if what's in that hole, and I'll take this trap and I'll put it there and see if I can catch something. So I did that, and then the next day I went to school, and when I got home, I was excited. I was going to go up to see what I caught, or if I caught anything, and I trudged up the hill, and I picked up some stones, because every time I went into the woods, just in case, I carried some stones in my pocket if I had to defend myself. A lot of defense I'd have, but anyway, you know how kids
Okay,
are.
right.
And so anyway, I went to the area, and I looked, and I saw that the stick was down, that the chain was holding the trap to, and the trap was gone. So I went over to the hole, and I looked down into the hole, and all of a sudden, this gray, wrinkly thing started to come out, and I thought, oh, that looks like a bee's nest coming out of there. So I stepped back a little bit, and much to my surprise, it was a small being, and it stood there before me. And as I was watching, I'm wondering, what is this thing doing in that hole? What have I caught? You know,
Right.
Next thing I knew, again, he had on a brown outfit. It had like badges with colored lights on it. He touched the bottom, colored one of the lights there, and it zipped out, and again it hit me in the forehead, and down I went. And then I heard multiple voices speaking, and it was they were saying something to the fact, oh, she's got another year. So evidently I had another year to go for some reason, who knows why. And after that, I went back home, and then the third time I was again going up to the woods. Being a tomboy, I wanted to go up and see how the blackberries were doing. So
Could I ask you, Betty, before we go on to the third one as a child, you've had these two experiences. Obviously, they left some kind of indelible impression on you. Would you go back and share this with friends or family, or did you just kind of keep it to yourself because it was weird and unique, but nothing that really upset you or scared you?
Well, you know, it was like taken from my memory after it had happened. It was years later that it all came forth. And this was the investigators' idea after I went through the 1967 encounter and all the hypnosis and the information all came out. Well, they thought, maybe there was some childhood experiences or a experience. And when they put me under, they found out, yes, I had 3 childhood experiences.
All right. Now talk to me about this third experience.
Okay. This third experience, I was walking up into the back of the yard. My father had made steps. It was like 2 levels of hills there. And then it went up into a big field where we had a vegetable garden. And in back of that was blackberries. And then a huge forest was there. Off to the left, there was a huge pond called Crocker Pond. And anyway, I was walking up the stairs, and I happened to draw my attention to the right, and I saw this bright light there, and it was getting bigger, and I thought, that looks like the moon, but what is it doing out at this time of day? So it came closer and closer, and then I was enveloped into a room of light, and that's when these beings were there, and I had an experience at that time. I probably shouldn't go through all of that experience because Bob and I have also started and pretty well finished a new book that we will be doing, which is called Lifting the Veil, and there's quite a bit of information in there. So,
well, walk me through a little bit of the experience to be enveloped by this light. Was there any kind of physical sensation, a tingling, a feel of watery substance, or any kind of tactile experience you could share with us?
Oh, yeah, there was. I could feel different things that they put me through. That's for sure. They put me on a wheel and it went round and round, and they had something around my mouth and nose and ears. evidently, so I wouldn't pass out or whatever. And then they stopped, and they took me into another room, and they took off my socks and shoes, and I'm laying on a table, and there's this other table or box that comes down, and there was bright light, green light started flashing, and then it was very misty in there, and there were these 4 barrels, I guess you would call them, double barrels, and at first white lines of light shot out on all 4 sides, and I could hear something like a rumbling and thunder a little bit, and then after that, and buzzing, and then a purple and a blue light shot out, all 4 surrounding me, and this was quite frightening to me while I was there. But they do put a relaxed feeling on you, so no matter what you're going through, you know you're going to be all right. So,
were you seeing anything, or were you just aware of what you were doing?
I was seeing all of these things. Everything that was happening, I was seeing, yes. Now,
could you see the beings that had you, or were you just like in a giant hamster cage for them to witness and watch you from a distance?
No, they just did whatever their routine was. Evidently, they have done this to other people as well. And I was taken out of there, was brought to different areas and was shown different things. But that particular one, I was going to be taken to see the one. And it was into the world of light and beyond the great door. And the thing is, the investigators tried to get that information out, but it evidently was not time for it because that did not come out. But I'll be explaining what happened with those things that went on in the other book, the new book that Bob and I are doing right now, Lifting the Veil.
Well, your husband, Bob Luca, is with us as well. Bob, I'd like to have you join the conversation at this point. And my question to you is, so many people have these synchronistic moments in their life and things that seem to bring them together, and this isn't really, it doesn't unfold for them until many years later why they came together. Had you ever had any experiences like this in your own past?
Absolutely. Betty and I were brought together. What brought us together started in 1944 when I was 5 years old. 1944, my dad was overseas in the armed forces. My mom and I were living with my grandmother. I was on a swing set in the backyard, and I noticed a light in the sky. The light got closer and closer and finally hovered just above and to the left of my swing set. A light came out of this thing, struck me in the forehead, a very thin white light, like about the size of a pencil lead, and I was paralyzed. I could not move. And as this thing tipped, it had a glass dome on top. Well, I don't know if it was glass, but a transparent dome on top, and I could see 2 little, what I called little people in there at the time. And what I was told was that they were preparing something that would be good for the world, and that people that had seen them will meet again in the future. Now, as a little kid, I didn't really understand this, and I was told that I couldn't say anything. I couldn't say anything to my mom, my grandmother, whatever. Well, okay, so that happened. Then in 1967, in the summer, I was on my way to the beach. It was a beautiful, clear day, crystal clear skies. I came to an area known as the Trap Rock, and it was a quarry, and there was railroad tracks that went into that trap rock. There were 5 men working on the rails. But as I approached them, I saw none of them were working. They were all looking up in the sky. So I looked up, and it was just amazing. There were 2 huge cigar-shaped craft just floating silently toward New Haven, Connecticut from where I was. And it was very clear, as I say, it was a crystal clear day, no clouds in the sky. It was easy to see there were no wings, no tail section, no windows, no noise, no contrail. These were obviously not aircraft. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind about that. I pulled over and I watched these things for a little while, and suddenly 2 disc-shaped objects dropped out of these, one out of each one. One went toward New Haven, the other one went in the opposite direction. So I watched till they were out of sight, thinking, wow, that's, whatever it is, that's really something. I started my trip to the beach again. I got a couple miles down the road, and this is a very rural area. There were no houses in the area or anything at the time. Suddenly, one of these disc-shaped objects came back, and it came like a falling leaf motion, kind of rocking from side to side, came down to a few feet above the ground and stopped on the left-hand side of the road, probably 10, 20 yards maybe in from where I was. Now, all this I have very clear conscious memory of. The next thing I knew, I was looking at this object, and it was a brilliant flash of a deep red light, which you would probably compare to a ruby laser, a brilliant red light. And somehow I was inside that thing. And there was one little gray guy when I got in there. Then there was 4 more that came up, so maybe that's a whole crew of 5, I don't know. But I was subjected to a physical examination. I had to remove my clothing. I was put on a table that I can only describe as plexiglass, maybe. I really don't know what the table was.
And what age were you at this point, Bob?
Let's see, I would have been about 28.
About 28 years old.
Yeah.
And you had how many experiences?
Just the one before this.
Okay. And Betty, your third moment, where you were about how old when you had that third one? You said you were about 18 or so. Is that right?
I was 13 was the third.
Okay, 13. All right, I was just wondering if there was any correlation with the age. All right, go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
No, that's okay. Now, I don't like being confined, and I was getting a little claustrophobic. And my first feeling was, hey, I want to get out of here. Well, this table was amazing because there were no restraints whatsoever, and yet it was like somebody had painted my back with super glue. I was stuck on that table. I could move my head a little bit and my eyes, and that was it. So I got an exam, which I didn't really want. Then they used something that I can only compare to a modern X-ray machine. It scanned my body from head to foot several times. It emitted a pinkish white light. Then when they were done with me, somehow I was put back in my vehicle. And the interesting thing is, at that time I was about 30 to 40 minutes from the beach. When I got to the beach, almost 3 hours had passed. I got there, I was hungry, I went to a restaurant, I couldn't believe when I saw the time. So I kind of kept that to myself. The only ones I told was my parents and my best friend at the time, who turned out to be a police officer.
We have about 30 seconds left, Bob. When you told your parents about this, how did they respond?
Well, my dad worked in the aerospace industry, and he didn't seem terribly surprised, although he never told me what he knew until the day he died. I never knew what he had been involved with. Some of the stuff he worked on is still sitting on the moon, so I'm sure he had knowledge that he probably could have shared with me, but for whatever reason he chose not to.
Intriguing. Both of you, fascinating stories. Both of you seeing, witnessing, and being abducted at stages in your life and then coming together in the future. I mean, it seems predestined. Why, Betty, do you believe that they chose you as children to begin this? Is that how they seem to do it with many people? It's starting at a very early age going on?
Well, it does seem as if things, once you've had an experience, the family somehow also begins to have some unusual things happening to them. A lot of paranormal activity. We've lived so far a very peculiar life. I have to say that. But it does seem as if the children are very much involved at times.
And Bob, do you think that maybe the reason you were chosen had something to do with your father's work?
I don't know. What I do know is that my mother had memories of a craft and of the inside, but she would never go under hypnosis. To the day she died, she was frightened of it, so we never found out what happened to her. What we do know, though, is in many times it does follow family lines. And, not just Betty and I, but many people all over the world have experienced this.
Right, and seems to trend as though they're keeping an eye on a certain bloodline.
Evidently,
that
yes.
seems right.
All right, let's now we know a little bit about both of you and the beginnings of this. And let's start up now, Betty, really dipping deep into this case. Was it 1967 for you as well when you had the most profound of your encounters?
Yes, it was January 25th, 1967. And what happened was my first husband had an automobile accident. He was hospitalized. And I have 7 children, so my mother and father came to stay with me to help me out while I was there alone, so I could go and visit him and get other things done. And it was that evening, that particular evening, the children were watching the television. My mother and father were in the living room with them, and I was there. And all of a sudden, the lights went out. And we saw a reddish-orange flashing light coming through the pantry window, in through the kitchen, and into the living room where we were. Well, my father and I thought, oh, it must be police or a fire somewhere. So what happened was I wasn't aware of it, but my father evidently had quickly gone out into the pantry area. And actually, Dave, he was the first to see the beings coming down the hill. They were in a hopping motion coming toward the porch. And the thing is, at that time after, when the investigators brought me in to have regressive hypnosis and the information came out about it, I asked him, Daddy, what happened with you? Did you see anything? And he says, yes, but I don't want to say anything. And I says, why? And he says, because he was worried about his Social Security might be taken away from him if he was to say anything. Because, of course, the world will attack a man before he will attack they will attack a young woman because of something happening. But I said, well, I'm going to have some support here, Daddy, of what you saw, And he said what he saw was like, what he said was, it was like children in Halloween costumes, like moon men, hopping down the hill. And that's all he remembered, because that's all there was, that he was awake. And so anyway, I went out into the kitchen area and was not aware that my father was out in the pantry area, because there was a half wall there. And as I was standing there, all of a sudden, 5 beings entered my kitchen right through the hard wooden door. And it was startling. I just stood there wondering, what is this,
Now, when you say they entered through the door, do you mean that they opened the door and came through it, or did they
came
phase?
Right through the wood. They came
right
through the wood, and they were standing there. And the thing was, because of that, immediately biblical messages came through my mind to entertain the strangers, for it may be angels unaware. And at that time, then I felt peace, and I felt love, because, who am I to say what angels are supposed to look like? Besides, I believe that a lot of people, there's a multitude of angels in many divisions. But they came through the door, and the leader was speaking to me like mental telepathy, trying to explain to me that they wanted something. And I thought, oh, they want meat with the fire to cook them some meat. So I went to the refrigerator, got a piece of meat, and I got the frying pan. I put it on the stove, and as I was cooking the meat, a little smoke rose up, and all of a sudden the leader jumped backwards, and then he started to talk with me again through the mind, and he says, no, we're looking for knowledge tried by fire. That's food for us. And so I put the pan to the side, excuse me, and at that point, I went into the living room. They came into the living room with me, and my mother and my 7 children were all sitting there on the couch as if time had stopped for them. They were like in a state of suspended animation, and that kind of startled me. And I thought, well, what can I give them that would be knowledge tried by fire? And I looked down, and I saw that the Bible was on the end table, so I picked that up. And I passed it to the leader, and when he held out his hand, I could see he had like 3 fingers only. And he put the book in his hand, and he waved his hand over it, and he passed. There were like 3 other thin books with just white light pages on them, and he passed it to the 3 that were beside him. And they stood there, and they didn't have to turn the pages at all. It just flipped one after another after another. It was like it was all lit up. I could see that as the pages were turning, it was like a white light was happening within the small books. And then he, in turn, had a thin blue book that he passed to me. And he says, this is something for you to see. And he says, you can keep it for 10 days. Try and get as much as you can from it. And don't let anybody else see it. So then I put that down on the end table. And I was still worried about my family just sitting there as if time had frozen for them. And I think he knew this because when I turned, I could see that he took my daughter, Becky, out of that suspended state briefly, and she stood up, and she could see what was going on briefly, and then, of course, he put her back into that state of suspended animation. He said his name was Quasgar, and at that point, I put the thin blue book down, and he said that I was going to be going with him someplace, so I followed. We went into the kitchen, and we went out the wooden door right through the wood, and I'm following in back of that leader, Quasgar, and then the other 3 were in back of me. Evidently, that other 5th one was left behind because later on, Becky, he was showing Becky certain games of some kind, and my father and the rest of the family must have stayed in that state of suspended animation. At that point, I was taken out into the backyard, and when we get out into the backyard, I could see the craft up on a slight hill off to the left in back of my house, and he raised his hand. When he raised his hand, he caused the lower part of the craft to become visible, and I could see what the machine looked like, and I've drawn pictures of that so that it's so much easier for people to understand what I saw. And so after that happened...
Well, could I bring you back for 1 second? I definitely want to hear what happened as this progressed, but a few points that I'm just curious about. You decide when he's looking for knowledge, when these beings are seeking something from us, you gave him the Bible. Is that correct?
I gave it, and you would think, well, here I am thinking they're angels. Of course, they must know what is in the Bible. However, the angels do as the Father tells them to do. And they probably are curious as well, and so that's what I feel that they probably were looking for, anything that explained what life is all about.
Did they give any sense of recognition once you'd handed them that book as though, we know this story?
Well, he just waved his hand over it. He didn't, Quasgar, his name was, he did not really look at the Bible. He just waved his hand over it, and there were 3 other small ones. So evidently the 3 standing by were not as high as he was, and probably the intellectual part of their life, whatever, because they were like consuming the lighted pages as they went by quickly, and it was as if they were consuming it with their eyes.
So they were absorbing the information that they were given. All right. Now, when you said that it decided to take you out and bring you through, you phased through this door. Was there a tactile sense? Could you feel anything as you passed through it?
No, I didn't. I did not feel it. We just passed through it automatically, and that was it. And when we got out there and I was brought aboard the craft, then he said that I was going to have to be measured for light. And that's what they did first, was measure me for light. And after that, they had me on this table when they were doing that. And then he told me that there were some spots there on the back of my knee. Now, I don't know what that meant, but anyway, I think it was just an excuse because after that he says, well, we're going to have to examine you. And at that point, they took a needle and they thrust it in my navel, and I guess they were checking me for procreation or something. And they said, oh, they had this roll of material that they took, and they opened it up, and they were looking at it. And then Koraska came over to me, and he said, there's something missing. And meanwhile, I had a hysterectomy, so that's what was missing. And then after that...
Well, let me ask you one more thing here, just to kind of get a little clarification. Quite a few people are instant messaging me on different social media sites. Is it your belief, at least at that point, that these beings were in fact angels?
Yeah, I still believe that it was angel. I think that the angels keep track of everything for Father.
All right, and you believe that the way they travel is in these craft, and this is, now you've said that these were the aliens that looked, are these the gray-like aliens that you were dealing with?
Yes, they were the gray with the very large black eyes, and they had on blue suits with a strap across their chest and a belt. They also had an insignia on their shoulder, on their suit, and it was like an eagle type bird that was there.
When you talk about this now, you know, according to the Bible, we are created in the image of God, and my understanding has always been is that the angels were similar to that. Why would we look so dramatically different from this race?
Well, as I said before, there are levels of angels as well.
Okay. All right, so you believe that this was just a different version, and perhaps...
They later let me know that they were watchers, that they were here to watch over nature and all natural forms. Evidently, they're part of the keepers for the Earth Foundation. Whatever needs to be checked, they check it. And maybe that's why their eyes are so big and black and so scary.
Now,
they're
you said that...
watching.
Now, the idea, Bob had mentioned your husband a little earlier and yourself, is that sometimes this follows a genetic line. Do you know, have these aliens also visited your children?
Yes, they have.
Okay. And when you've been examined by them, and you said that they inserted a needle through your navel, have they left behind physical trace evidence of their visits that have ever been documented medically?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of, no. There was one other thing that they did. They also said they had to check further, and they thrust a needle up into my left nostril, and he put his hand on my forehead to take away a lot of the pain. But when he withdrew the needle, I could see a BB-like thing on the end of that needle. So evidently, they had been checking me for quite some time.
All right. Now, did these beings ever tell you that they were angels, or did they just allow you to believe that because that was already your preconceived notion of them?
No, they said that they were keepers of nature in all natural form, and it must just have been group of, or one of the groups of angels that God has formed.
Okay, but they didn't really subscribe to a title. They were just keepers.
Well, they said they were watchers as well.
Watchers. Okay. All right. Now, Bob, was this similar to the type of beings that you were witnessing as well?
Well, excuse me, the ones that had grabbed me were similar in that they were the small grays with the big black eyes. However, they had a skin-tight red uniform with a lightning bolt insignia on the left-hand side of the chest. Other than that, the general appearance was pretty much the same.
I'm curious then, so your big experience when you were 28 was in 1967, Bob, is that right?
That's correct.
And Betty, your big experience also took place in 1967, correct?
Yes, that is.
Okay, now you two did not know each other at this point because or did you?
No.
Okay. Were you aware or had you ever bumped into each other on these craft or during these meetings at all?
No.
Nope.
All right. We're running out of time in this segment, but I'm just curious, when you first met, did you meet through some kind of mutual UFO type network, or did you know that you had both had these experiences prior to sharing, or no?
Our meeting was very strange,
Yeah.
highly unusual.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.